Hello, lovelies. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Alison Hayes, who is a disability advocate, a coach, and now a published author. She is releasing her first two books on today, May 12th, 2025. The first book is entitled Thriving While Disabled, Recognizing Bias. And the second is called Thriving While Disabled, Navigating Disability Finances. So during this episode, we get into Allison's personal story. I even share a little bit about the journey that my family went through when my daughter became disabled at 16. We're going to talk about hidden biases. We're going to talk about navigating the U.S. benefit system. We're going to talk about barriers that people with disabilities face and all sorts of things surrounding ableism. So if this is something that maybe you've never thought about because it hasn't touched you personally, or even if you have friends, family members, co-workers, etc., that may be experiencing struggles in their lives due to disabilities, then this episode is absolutely for you. All right, so get comfortable and let's get into it. Hey, lovelies. Welcome back to season 4 of the You Are Immeasurable podcast. I'm Tanisha Hyde, your host, divine business alchemist, healer, sacred mirror, and warrior mystic. After taking a very sacred pause, doing some deep reflection, and a whole lot of realignment, we're bringing you this season with a whole new frequency. We're going deeper, discussing richer topics, and getting more soul rooted than ever. Now, we're still talking divine alignment, but we're expanding it. So this season, we're reclaiming our power through our shadow work, through our intuitive healing, through our ancestral wisdom, and we're even going to talk about and explore our sacred rage. We're here to honor the truth that the journey back to ourselves isn't always pretty, but it absolutely is powerful. We're going to talk about navigating the dark feminine, connecting with the parts of ourselves that we've been taught to fear, and realigning our lives and our businesses from the inside out. Now, you know me, I keep it real. So absolutely expect some raw solo episodes, some sacred storytelling, and also some soulful guest conversations with people who are doing the deep work and living boldly in their truth. And just so you know, new episodes are now going to drop every Wednesday. And that too is part of the realign, because sometimes you just need that midweek reminder that you are still magic, you're still worthy, and you still are on your path. So whether you're sipping tea, coffee, a glass of wine under the moonlight, let's go ahead and raise a glass to healing, to expansion, and to becoming the most unapologetic, authentic, and immeasurable version of ourselves. Are you ready? Let's get into it. All righty. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining me for this conversation. For those of you who may not know, this is Alison Hayes. She is our guest today, and she is an expert in thriving, even though you may be experiencing disability. And that's in yourself, that's with your family members, those around you, all of that. So, Allison, again, I thank you so much for joining me and agreeing to have this conversation, because I feel like that it touches a lot of us. And sometimes it's just one of those things that until you're faced with it, you don't really know what to do. You don't know what to do about it. It's a lot of emotion, a lot of things, a lot of moving parts and pieces, if you will, that you don't know until you're there. I think it's amazing that you've built a whole community, a business. You've even written a book, which we're going to talk about, to help people to navigate when this happens, when they're faced with this, or when they're blindsided with it, and all of those things. So I want to give you the floor to introduce yourself and to talk to us about your journey, what it is you do, how you help people, all of the things.
Okay, so as Tanisha mentioned, I'm Alison Hayes. I run Thriving While Disabled, which is a blog and has also evolved into a coaching business where I also offer some educational material. I am about to publish actually 2 books because the first book was so long and so full of information. We decided the best way to handle it was actually to divide it into two. And so both of them will be out on May 12th. And the first one is Thriving While Disabled, Recognizing Bias. And the second is Thriving While Disabled, Navigating Disability Finances. Basically, I have a condition called functional neurological disorder, which I've been living with since at least the age of 20. And I've actually lived most of my life with disabilities. I was diagnosed with a fine motor disability when I was about 3, depression when I was 9, and anxiety around when my FND symptoms showed up. And it took about 3 years after my symptoms started for me to actually be correctly diagnosed with FND. So it's been a journey. And basically what I've done is I had to get on Social Security disability coverage shortly after my FND diagnosis. And I basically have had to build my life around managing the whole US benefits system, which is a mess, to put it lightly. And that's before all the things that have been happening recently. So when my partner had a fall and shattered his acetabellum, I spent about a year helping him get properly diagnosed. And during that time, he saw all of these things I had just naturally been doing and pointed out that a lot of people really don't know what to do, don't understand the processes, and would have just been completely lost and overwhelmed when faced with a hospitalization, a long-term hospital stay, surgery, all of the pieces that came with it. And so once I recovered from the new trauma of his injury, which triggered a relapse of my FND, and he recovered, it took him about 6 months to be able to walk again. And then another 6 months of before he was like really walking comfortably, about 2 years before he stopped needing a cane. But we spent, after that first year, he was in good enough shape and I was in good enough shape that I started Thriving While Disabled as a blog. I got a lot of really positive feedback. People were pointing out that I'm coming at this from a different angle. Usually people who help folks through the system are social workers or other people in positions of authority who haven't been through the process. And so my big focus in the blog and in these books is to come in as another disabled person and share my experience and research I've done and experience and things I've learned and put it all in a very digestible, understandable way so that people aren't surprised by all of the layers of ableism that they're facing, and they're better set to handle and navigate what comes after, because becoming disabled is a loss. But there are people who get stuck in that and can't get themselves out. And then there are people who take it and are able to integrate that into their lives so that they can continue to move forward, so they can thrive despite, and it's not really despite the condition, because very often an almost bigger problem is the way society treats people with disabilities. The worst thing about that is the disabled population is the largest minority in this country, and we're about 27% of the US population. So when we're talking about the community of people with disabilities, it's huge. And nobody is very willing to talk about the disabled identity. We're a minority identity that doesn't get recognition, and we're frequently not considered. And just to add to it, almost every other identity that's marginalized, much of the phobia and attacks on them are based on ableist being identified as disabled in some way by society. And the response tends to be, yeah, but I'm not, rather than any kind of acceptance of disability or the disabled identity.
Yeah. And I think that it is one of those things that a lot of what you just said is it's looked at as being less than. I'll say it like that.
Very much.
Even like I think I said in the beginning, it's something that you don't think about unless it's a part of your life. And I think that is the problem.
Oh, absolutely. And we're socially trained for that, though, because basically disability is a reminder of your own mortality, and people don't like to think about that.
Yeah.
The disability identity is the only minority identity people can join at any time.
Yeah, yeah. I remember
Mhm.
you saying that before. And
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, you're
Yeah.
right. Because and it's one of those things that you never know.
Right. And you never know if it will happen. There are no guarantees that it won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, people with disabilities find themselves socially isolated
Mm-hmm.
because most of the people around us choose not to think about their own mortality. And
Yeah,
so it's easier for them to just disassociate and wash their hands and walk away than to
yeah.
actually make the effort to maintain the friendship or maintain the relationship, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I realize that it's something that you don't think about until you have to think about it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And it's also kind of the evil specter in every kind of insurance policy out there.
Yeah.
Why do you get insurance? You get insurance.
For the
So
what
if
ifs, for
right,
the just in case.
exactly. And
Yeah.
disability can be that boogeyman of just in case, that
Mm-hmm.
boogeyman that they're scaring you with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
health insurance too. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
don't wanna go too far down the health insurance, but health insurance is extractive, and health insurance is designed to work not too badly for abled, healthy people. The
Yeah.
more disabled you are, the worse it is for covering you, and the more likely it is for them to stop covering you.
Yeah, yeah. So that would bring to mind the existing conditions clauses.
Pre-existing condition, yep.
And unless you've had to deal with it, then it's not something that's always on your mind.
Well,
And so
yeah.
I guess a question that I would have
Mhm.
for maybe those that have been blessed that disabilities and people with disabilities and those things aren't, like, I'll say, in their families or what have you, not saying that you aren't blessed if you have a disability or what have you, that's not what I'm saying,
No,
but
I
again, it's one of those things that most of us don't think about until we have to. I'll even use myself as an example.
mhm.
My mom became disabled when I was 23, 24. She got hurt at work, fell, all kinds of things. And so I saw the process with her, and it wasn't easy. I think it took maybe 3 or 4 years, all of these different doctors, all of these different assessments, and you have to try this and you have to try that and you have to do this and you have to do that. And it's like, okay, I get it that maybe there are some that try to scam the system or trick the system or whatever for whatever malicious reasons. But what bothers me is that just makes it that much harder for those that actually need the assistance and the help, or those that really do have an issue, to be able to get the help and the care and the concern and all those things that they need. And then it came up again for me more closer to home when my youngest daughter was 16. She had her first crisis. And even in that, it took a year
Mhm.
for them to figure out what it was, because it's a congenital defect or condition that they had to dig for and search for and all of that. So even in that, it was close to home with my mom, but it was even closer because this is my child and
Yep.
she's her. And so I gotta figure out what is all of this mess. So I think for those that have not had to deal with it or don't, it might be a fleeting thought that yes, people that are living with disabilities do need, whatever, whatever, whatever. But again, you're thinking of it from the standpoint of a
Able.
able-bodied person. And so you really don't know
Well, and the other
what it is.
part, so like I tend to prefer using the word abled instead of able-bodied because the reality of it is that a huge percentage of disabilities are non-apparent.
Yeah.
And so like it can be immune systems are compromised or
Okay.
mental illness or all of these other things where the bodies might still pretty much be working or look okay from the outside,
Okay.
but
On the inside is
on the
different.
inside or in the
Yeah.
brain, in the function, in something, there's a
Yeah.
huge impact. The
Yeah.
other thing
Okay.
is that fear of a scammer, the rate of actual scams is incredibly low. But
You
what
gotta go
happens
through a lot of foolishness.
Oh, yeah, no, the disability process in the US and in a lot of countries, like, okay, the way to look at it in that when you're thinking about that is disability there's kind of 2 levels.
Okay.
There's the having a disability, which is what like over 27% of the US population is.
Hmm.
And in that sense, having a disability can be as simple as needing glasses or a diagnosis of depression or other things that may or may not impair your ability to like get a job and function in society, but
Okay.
which still take effort, time, energy, and or money to manage and make a non-issue.
Right. Okay.
And then there's certified disabled, which is where the larger community, like within the US, it's Social Security, has made the determination that you are too disabled to be able to work and financially support yourself, and therefore you're on benefits.
Okay. Okay.
So, one of the challenges is a lot of people who aren't certified disabled don't even embrace the identity of disabled.
Right. Okay. Okay.
And I think it's important to normalize disability as a neutral term, not a pejorative one.
Okay.
So, disabilities are dynamic, they change over time.
Okay.
And they can change in intensity and in needs. And so, some people have very dynamic disabilities. Other people have relatively static ones, but also people can be temporarily disabled, where severely ill or broken limb, things like that, where there's a
Okay.
period of
Yeah.
time where they can't do things, but they may regain full functionality afterwards. And then there's
Okay.
also situationally disabled, which is what they're doing right in the moment leaves them unable to fully function. So, an example, a very mild example of situationally disabled is if somebody's carrying a large amount of things in their arms, they can't use their arms in that time period. So, they're
Okay.
situationally disabled and need someone to open the door for them or help them
Okay.
get through, things like that. Another really
Okay.
good example of situationally disabled is traveling with a small child, because you've got to be keeping an eye on them and making sure they don't walk where they're not supposed to, they don't stumble into something, they don't get lost. And so your mind isn't 100% on the task you're doing. You
Hmm.
constantly have part of your energy and attention focused on
Going
that
somewhere else.
child so they don't have a problem. You may also
Wow.
be holding their hand or carrying them,
Yeah.
meaning you don't
Okay.
have the use of the limb for that
Yeah.
time period.
I don't think people think about it like that.
Oh, absolutely not. But they should, because that's the reality of it. And that's
Yeah.
not making light of other people with more severe disabilities. That's just a way to normalize the language, normalize the word disabled, because right now the word and the concept have become so taboo that
Right.
people try to find alternative words.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so people are like, "Oh, differently abled, handy capable," and all this other BS. That no, the word
Mhm.
is disabled. Disabled is
Yeah.
not a bad word. It
Yeah.
is a neutral descriptor.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
let's use it more.
I like that. And it does, with you saying it like that, it makes so much sense. I can definitely say that it's one of those things that people they run from. And I think it's because we have this whole obsession with independence
Yeah. It's
and
the
not having to be reliant on something or someone.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of societal messaging around independence when actually we're all interdependent anyway.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of ageism. There's a
Yeah.
lot of sexism. There's a lot of, all of the isms out there.
Yeah.
And the further you are from the societal normative expectations, the more of a fight you have on your hands.
Yeah.
And disabled is one of those concepts that is very, very taboo, even though it has always been a natural part of the process. In fact, the
Yeah.
big change that's been happening has really been that people have been more and more willing to identify as disabled earlier because it's safer to than it has been in the past couple hundred years. Still not easy. It's still a big fight, but
Yeah.
when nothing was wheelchair accessible, you didn't see anybody who needed mobility assistance of any sort because they couldn't leave their house.
Right.
Now, some buses and trains are actually accessible.
Yeah.
Some buildings are accessible. There's a little more awareness. It's still not where it needs to be, but at
No.
least
No.
there's some acknowledgement, there are some protections and so on, but people very rarely recognize just how deep the ableism goes and how much it's part of all of societal messaging. And so I talk about systemic ableism because, like you said, the process of doing things like applying for disability to become certified disabled, that is a huge fight. It's a lot of very personal information and details that get shared to a government agency that everything from the questionnaires to the decision-making process is built on incorrect assumptions and identifications of disability, and on the presumption that people who are applying might be lying rather than might be exhausted.
Right. Yeah. And I
So
think that's part of what I think makes it so hard. Because for myself, when it became something that I had to deal with and interact with and try to figure out, every time I found out something, it was like, oh, wow. Okay. And then 3 or 4 people that I knew that could use this information would pop in my head. And I'd be like, okay, hey, guess what? I just found this out. Here you go. Like I'm shooting information and all of this stuff because I'm like, oh, knew this. And so I think that that too is part of one of those things that we have to be, and I don't know if the word is curious or we have to be concerned or compassionate or we just, whatever, the proper word for it is, that we should at least want to be educated enough that if we come across somebody, because like you said, we're interdependent. So I may not need this information necessarily right at this moment, but I never know I'm going to cross paths with. I never know who may be sent into my ecosystem or stratosphere or whatever that could possibly benefit from this when they don't have the information or no one told them, no one showed them, or again, it's something that they never needed before and never thought about it.
Oh yeah, so like really a big part of that is again that blinders kind of situation of people don't want to acknowledge it. It's also why I've made these books.
Yeah.
Basically the first book is understanding bias. And it's just digging into the stories, the myths, the history of and around disability to help people who are newly disabled or the family members of disabled people to start to really understand what's actually going on and what they're actually facing. Because it's not just about having the disability, it's about having the label of disabled put on you.
Yeah.
And it's about the way society responds to that. There's also a really strong connection to classism because many disabled people become poor and many poor people become disabled.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. Facing poverty is traumatic.
Yes.
Trauma
Absolutely.
And trauma increases the odds of many different kinds of disabilities.
Right.
Quality of medical care, quality of nutrition, all of these things that are associated with being in a better or worse financial situation are also associated with greater or lesser risks of becoming disabled.
Yeah.
Or of having something that's a little funky in your body get really bad.
Get really bad. Right. So said that you ended up splitting the book into 2.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to talk about like what made you to decide to do that. I know you said something about your editor or somebody saying that maybe it was just too much, which especially if you're somebody that's already newly in this lane, it's already a lot.
Exactly.
So I can see that. So tell me about what the 2 sections are, what their aim is and what they're for.
Okay. So the first book was initially like the beginning of the whole thing. And it was really about making sure that everybody who was reading was coming into it with similar knowledge.
Okay.
So it was about bias, discrimination, recognizing what ableism is, how it works, what I mean by structural ableism, because I'm not just talking about physical structures, I'm also talking about social structures.
Right.
So it's not just structural ableism in the sense of people with wheelchairs can't get into places that don't have ramps and elevators. It's also structural ableism when you have to do this really long form that's poorly written and inaccurate and turn it in to a group of employees who are underpaid, overworked, don't really care about you that much. And everything within the system nudges them in the direction of deciding that you don't need the program.
Right.
Classism reinforces all of this because if you come from a well-off family, they're likely to be able to help you minimize the extent of your disability and minimize the likelihood of becoming disabled in the first place.
Right. And
Depending on
you won't need the program anyway because you're financially able to do whatever needs to be done. So if you need modifications to the house, if you need additional support, maybe like in-home health care or assistance, therapists, all of those things, you have the means to do that. I would say that maybe there is even a higher percentage of disabled people that we know nothing about because they're not having to tap into those resources because they already have them on their own.
Well, this is the thing. Families that are well off have the lawyers and the whatever to help them find out about all of the programs so they can apply for every single one that they're eligible for. Where lower income families don't have those resources, so they have
don't have an idea.
Right. And so that's kind of what the second book goes into. The first book is let's understand what's happening here. Let's pick up the perspective. Let's see what it really is, what it really means, how you can protect yourself as a disabled person from blaming yourself, from holding yourself responsible for things that are not your fault. Because already there's lots of societal messaging of failure. So it's really easy into those kinds of mental and emotional traps. Second half of the first book is about life milestones with a disability. So I've got a chapter that talks about the right to exist. I talk about like the Canadian program MAID and why there are so few children with Down syndrome in Iceland and all of the and IVF and all these things that are related to the ability to have children, the ability to choose when and if you die and things like that. And so like there's all of these control issues that have a lot of ableist bias and ableist messaging by them. And I'm not necessarily pro or anti, except for things that are like very cut and dry morally. But my point is you need to know these things exist so you can think about them. I've also got a chapter on education, a chapter on marriage, a chapter on deciding whether or not to have children. Marriage is deciding whether or not to get married because there's implications financially and socially. And unfortunately, the way that things are run, disabled people get penalized for getting married. And we're the only identity group where it's actively punished, I think, rather than rewarded, like the actual act of getting married and combining household incomes and things like that. It's how to give yourself and a partner, what would it cost to get married? What would it cost not to get married? What protections can you give yourself either way? And just looking at the whole puzzle and finding potential solutions to it. And every chapter's got resources lists too, to go and things to look for. Book 2 is Thriving While Disabled, Navigating Disability Finances. And that is a dive into the programs, the thought processes, the protections, the interactions to expect, and kind of, if you're facing this situation, here's what you need to think about and be aware of and consider so that you can keep yourself safe. Here's some programs that might help you. Here's where they are, because disability support programs are all over the government. They're not consistently placed. There isn't really a disability program. There are programs for seniors that happen to help people with disabilities too. There's programs for children that happen to help people with disabilities too. There's programs, it's all over the place. And so knowing where to look is a huge challenge. So I just put it all together in one handy dandy book so that you don't have as many of the, oh my God, I didn't know that existed. That would have helped me 5 years ago kind of moments.
So it sounds to me like these are definite resources that honestly everybody would need, or somebody close to you or somebody that you know. This can happen at any time, any place. You never know. So this is one of those things, like those old home remedy books that, your grandmother had for like 700 years. You never know. So you should always have these things around just in case. It very much is one of those things that I feel like most of us that don't think about it, maybe it's time that we should. And that could be one of those things that can help with the rules, the regulations, the forming of agencies and programs and things like that to help. If not you, someone you love, or even, hey, just your fellow brother, sister,
fellow humans,
or whatever, or whoever. Again, we're all interconnected, as we've already said. We're all a part of the human race. So, yes, we should all be wanting to at least have a little piece of knowledge that might come in handy. If you never need it, that's great. But someone, your next door neighbor, somebody across the street, somebody who just happens to go to school with one of your kids or your grandkids, you never know.
And the other part too is you can look at the first book as your primer for just understanding what the issues are and what the experience is, because we all have biases. Nobody is free of bias.
That's
And
true.
a lot of the biases that we have against people with disabilities are very, very deeply rooted. These are things we picked up like practically in infancy.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of unlearning to be done. And
Yeah.
it's because people are so reluctant to think about it, because people are so reluctant to acknowledge it. It's unlearning that most people never do, which makes it all the harder when they suddenly find they're part of this club.
Yeah, definitely. And I would also say that even maybe a lack of exposure, because if we all stay in our little silos and everybody around you is just like you, then there's lots of things that you have no clue that, are untrue that you've learned or been taught and told, just wildly inaccurate or just made the hell up. In some cases, that's another reason that I feel like these books, whichever one you decide to dive into first, would definitely be an addition, because we should all be forever learners. We should all want to know something more about what we may not be immediately exposed to all the time.
Well, and the other part of it is that it's likely we all do know disabled people. We may even be disabled, but not ready to
And
take the
not
label.
know it.
And
Or not know it.
right. Oh yeah, no, because like there's a lot of people now who are being diagnosed with things like ADHD and autism, and it's been who they are. It's been in them their whole lives.
Their whole life. Yeah.
But they didn't have the vocabulary. They didn't have the diagnosis. A lot of parents of children who are diagnosed with autism, as being on the autism spectrum, actually have at least some of those tendencies themselves.
And they consider it's normal because it's what they know. So they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean this is something else? Yeah.
Exactly.
And so for somebody, and I think that might be a part of it too, for somebody to tell you that you're not normal, it's like, well, wait a minute, hold on. I don't like that.
Right. And so like those are the kinds of things. And internalized ableism is a huge issue, which is the other reason why I wrote this the way I did, because a lot of people with disabilities are not in a position to not be ableist, either towards themselves or towards people with very different disabilities. I personally had been attacked by other disabled people because the condition that I have, functional neurological disorder, can trace its roots back to hysteria. And so they assume that it's the same thing, and that therefore I'm a poor deluded soul who was misdiagnosed by a misogynistic doctor who was looking for a container to put my weird symptoms into and picked this one out of a hat. And all of that is wrong.
Yeah. But it happens a lot.
Right. Exactly. And so there's a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen around this. And so I really want to help people recognize these things and break out of these mental habits, because the fact of the matter is everybody knows somebody who has a disability.
Yeah.
Everybody knows somebody who fits this this label of disabled, maybe not certified disabled, but definitely having a disability.
Yeah.
And the better you are at recognizing that, the more likely they are to be able to trust you and share that
Yeah.
with you if they know.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
the more likely you are to be able to help somebody get through that acceptance process so they
Mhm.
don't make themselves worse or so they
Right.
don't end up in a bad place. And so a big part of my goal is stuff like that. I don't want people feeling lost or stuck or more depressed or more anxious than they have to be.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to help people find these paths of hope so that they can be in a better place. And I'm trying to help because we're everywhere. We're parts of every group. And unless we know we're safe, we're probably going to be stealth.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that we decided to have this conversation. You are a wealth of knowledge. I agree that these are definitely conversations that need to be had. What kind of sticks with me from my own experience is it's one of those things that you never really think about until you have to think about it. Until you're in that of having to deal with it, you really, really don't know what you don't know or all the things that you don't know. I'm so glad that now I know somebody. And now that you have this book coming out, we can definitely share that information as a resource for people. You may not need it now, but you never know.
Right.
You never know. And it's always better to be prepared than flailing and trying to figure something out in an urgent situation. So I definitely want to thank you so much for coming and having this conversation with me. The books are coming out May 12th.
May 12th, Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And I encourage people to come to my website because I have more things in the pipeline after the books come out. Right now, my
Okay.
focus is making the books happen, but I've got some
Yeah.
more. I've got some thoughts and some plans for future activities, so I really want people to stay informed.
Informed. Yes.
Other thing to know is the books will have a link to my website where I'll keep a page with the resources on it. So
Okay.
they have the full links to go to the websites.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I will be trying to keep the information updated as changes occur.
Okay, yeah, because yeah, lots of things are changing, especially in the US right now. So will the books also be available in different formats, like hard copy? Will you have like digital, like Kindle
Yep.
version or what have you?
Yes. It's going to be paperback, hardback, and ebook, all three formats.
Awesome. We'll definitely make sure to be picking those up because you never know. And this is definitely very, very valuable information, very important information to have in, I would say, all communities, in all families, because as you stated, you can become a part of this identity any given time and without warning. It's definitely, in my opinion, a great resource to have. And you are a great resource to have for questions and things like that. I really appreciate you coming and having this conversation with me. I hope that those listening have gained some clarity, have gained a little bit of confidence, and maybe are now less afraid that if they identify or if they've discovered that they have a disability or know someone, that identity is no longer something that has to scare them or make them feel some way, because hey, are any of us really normal anyway? I mean, I'm just saying.
I don't want to be. I
And
don't want to
I
be.
hope not. I hope not.
Exactly.
Because yeah, we like to be individuals here. Is there anything that you want to add before we end?
Basic thing is don't forget everybody is just one accident, injury, or infection away from
Huh?
becoming disabled. And that's not intended to scare people. It's just
Yeah,
reality.
that's true. Very true. Very, very true. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, cheers to your transformation. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of You Are Immeasurable. I hope something in today's conversation sparked a remembering, a shift, or even just a softening in your spirit. If you've loved this episode, do me a favor. Please share it with someone who needs it and make sure you're following the show so that you never miss a new activation. You can connect with me over on Instagram or Facebook at Agitator Hyde. That's my handle on all platforms. DMs are always open if you want to go deeper. if you have questions, or you just want to share how the episode landed for you, or you can also comment on whichever platform you are listening to this episode on. Always remember your power, your path, and your purpose are already within you. You are absolutely not broken. You are blossoming. You are becoming. And remember, you are immeasurable. So until next time, be well, be bold, and stay true to the divine within you.